Hi, my name is Juan, and welcome to The Couch, a podcast where real therapists talk about real things. Please remember that we are therapists, but we are not your therapists, and this podcast is intended for educational purposes only.
All right, you're back with me. Today's podcast episode, will my kids be resilient if they don't struggle like I did? You know, I was sitting down not too long ago with a dad, and we got into this topic, right? So the topic, on a very straightforward level is you are a parent and you grew up with certain struggles, right? You were exposed to certain things in life. Maybe you went through poverty. Maybe you went through a really rough neighborhood, right? You went through some hard shit. And you know what? You wouldn't wish it on somebody else, right? That's the truth. And within that, the pressure cooker effect took place, right? You stood and you conquered in some ways. You overcame, you hustled, you pushed forward, right? So with all that pressure, made you into who you are today, right? And likely you're successful. You've checked off boxes. You've done amazing things. And as you're listening to this episode, right, what brought you here is there's this inner worry, right? This unknown of my kids are growing up in a different space, right? My kids are growing up in a different space where they're not seeing the things that I saw. They're not going through those experiences. Will they be resilient, right? Are they going to overcome struggles? I grew up with very little in many ways. I grew up in a very different way compared to my kids. Now, for those of you that know and that listen to the podcast, right, you're aware that I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and it has its beauties, right? In certain parts of it is a beautiful country. It's an island. It shares a border with Haiti. It's a beautiful place. I grew up with certain experiences. I remember my mom as a kid, she'd grab a chicken, right, and just whack it, and we ate from that, right? We had a pig in the yard, a couple of other animals, small little space. I remember the windows were these wooden panels, and we'd have like a mosquito net over us, right? Because it got pretty bad there. I remember the lights would go off, and that was just normal. I remember, shower time was outside of this big old water like tank. You kind of scoop some water and put it on you. Now, these were very different experiences. And I know that, and I've met people that have went through even much more difficult experiences than the ones that I've shared. And today I'm a dad. My kids are going through different experiences, right? My kids have running water every day, electricity every day. They don't have to worry about lights going off, unless some sort of storm comes in. There's enough food on the table, right? They have access to both parents. And those are different experiences than the ones that I went through. And I wouldn't wish my experiences upon them. So a worry that I have, and with worries, right, something I advocate is when you have a worry, look at it as a puzzle. I'm taking a little tangent here for a second. That's all a worry is a puzzle that you can, move around and play with and, see how close you get to solving it. Now, some worries, stick with me on this tangent. They'll be just like a puzzle, and you won't be able to solve it right away. You have to put that puzzle down and come back to it later. So this worry that I have, with my own kids is ones that I've had clients over the years share with me that they have with their kids. And recently I sat down with this really cool guy, and he was telling me that's a bit of a worry there. My children are growing up with more opportunities, right? Fewer hardships. So the big question, important question is, would they develop, right? Would they develop the same strengths that I did? Would they be resilient? So look, if you've ever wondered whether making life easier for your children might actually make them weaker, I think this is a good episode for you. It's one that I'm excited about. Let's dive in. I think many parents, especially, those that have went through some hardships, right? So like as an example, first generation parents, right? I think they carry this concern, right? Maybe you grew up sharing a bedroom with siblings. Maybe your family, right, out loud talked about just the difficulty of paying bills. Maybe you had a lot of responsibility as a kid, taking care of the younger kids. Maybe you started cooking meals for everyone in the house. Right? Maybe there were times when failure wasn't really an option for you. There was no backup plan A, B, C. And because of those experiences, you know what? You developed grit. Now, if you get a chance, look up Dr. Angela Duckworth. She talks a lot about the research on grit. It's really amazing work. You learn how to solve problems, right? You learn perseverance. You learn how to tolerate discomfort. That is such an important skill right there, tolerating discomfort. Now you look at your kids and you see them and you're like, shit, right? I love these kids and they have such a different reality than mine, right? Yes, they have more stability. Yes, they have more support. Yes, they have more resources. And because of all those things, they have what? They have more comfort, right? They have more comfort than what you had and what you ever had growing up. So, we have this thought that just creeps its way in. What if they don't develop the resilience, right, that I developed? And I think it's a valid concern, right? I strongly believe it is a valid concern. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but it's a valid concern, and it can happen. Right away, I want to tell you this. Resilience is not created by suffering alone. Resilience is created by overcoming challenges with support. Right, that's a huge difference there. And hopefully it's a sign of relief. I think sometimes we confuse trauma with resilience. We look at the things that we've been through. I became strong because life was difficult. But I think if we really examine that, if we look at it really closely, many people, including myself, right, the hardships we go through, not all of us come out stronger. Right? Some of us come out, and I certainly have, with wounds, with anxiousness, with struggles, right? Some of us come out with struggles with building relationships. And that may mean that, we seek therapy, we work with a counselor, someone really helpful and supportive in the local area. So I'll plug Santos Counseling in, of course. If you're in the Greensboro or anywhere in North Carolina, we'd be happy to be there with you, walk with you. The lesson here, right? The lesson here is that trauma doesn't mean that you go through something hard and it's going to make you stronger. Right? There's ways to grow. Right? Your child doesn't need financial insecurity to learn gratitude. They don't need instability to learn responsibility. They don't need suffering to learn perseverance. Right? All of these are just opportunities, right? Opportunities to look at. There are other ways to help your child build security, to help your child build gratitude, to help your child build stability and responsibility and perseverance. Just looking at this, here's a few ways. First, remember, every situation is different, right? I think one item that we can do is we can first let our child struggle appropriately. Right? Not every frustration needs a rescue. I remember learning this when my kids were really little. They would cry and maybe my mom was there. Let them be, give them their time. Right? And I think there's something hidden in that there are moments where we need to be in that struggle. Right? We need to know how it feels. Right? Your kid gets a bad grade, you jump in right away and tell the teacher, how dare you give my kid a bad grade? They're an A/B student. Right? Well, what if we just let them sit in that? Right? Let them be a part of that process. Let them experience it. How could that experience help them move forward? Right? Not every disappointment needs a solution from the parent. When a child forgets something, right, gets a poor grade, they lose at a soccer game, they get rejected by someone, right? Those are, my friends, those powerful moments of teaching. Now, this is an episode that I want to do a bit more of in the future. But for today, I want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with look for opportunities to help your child versus jumping right away and solving X, Y, or Z. I'll see you in the next episode.